All right, so welcome everyone to Back to the Basics Poultry 101. We thank you for joining us tonight. My name's Abby Yancey. I'm the Dairy and Livestock Specialist at CCE of Jefferson County. So to start a little bit about me, I grew up in Western New York, and so now living in Northern New York in Jefferson County. I come from a dairy farm background, hence this picture with my cow Susie over here. I was heavily involved in 4-H as a youth. I went to Penn State University for my undergraduate degree, which is in animal science. And then I moved to the Midwest to go to Iowa State to get my master's in animal breeding and genetics. And my research at Iowa State focused on feed efficiency in dairy cattle. And I'll turn it over to my colleague, John, to introduce himself.
Hey guys, how's it going? I'm John. I'm the Soldiers and Veterans in Agriculture Specialist at CCE Jefferson County. Real quick, a little bit about myself. I grew up in Wisconsin. I attended the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And after I graduated, I joined the U.S. Army. Was stationed here at Fort Drum, where after 2 combat tours, I got out in 2015. And after I got out, my wife and 5 kids and I started a small farm here in Antwerp, where we specialize in Highland cattle, sheep, and poultry.
Thanks, John. So to start, if we're talking about poultry, the first thing you want to consider is what is your goal? So are you looking to have a few chickens in your backyard? Are you looking to make some extra income? So by selling eggs or meat in a farm stand? Are you looking to start a larger sized flock? And something important to do is to consider the initial investment costs for each option. So it's going to be a bit more of an investment to start a larger size flock than it would be just to have a few chickens in your backyard. So that's something to keep in mind. Next, you want to consider if you want egg layers, or meat birds, also known as broilers, or maybe you want to focus on a dual purpose breed. So a breed that can produce a good quantity of eggs per year, but also can yield some meat for you as well. So to contrast layers and broilers, so first layers, so they start laying after about 18 to 24 weeks of age, but something to keep in mind, so they won't be right up to their prime production. So the most that they could be laying at that time, and their eggs will be a little bit smaller. And so layers will eventually lay about 1 egg per day. Of course, this will differ based on the breed. And so if you consider if you have 12 hens, they will eventually lay 84 eggs per week if they're each laying 1 egg per day. And so for layers, you only need females. You don't necessarily need a rooster. So if you're just looking to produce eggs, there's no need for the eggs to be fertilized. However, unless you want to grow your layer flock, then you would need a rooster. For broilers, meat birds generally take 7 to 12 weeks to reach market weight, so a little bit shorter time frame than when the layers would start laying eggs. And the finishing time depends on the breed and how big you want them to get pre-slaughter. And so keep in mind that your yield will be about 67% of the live weight, so not all of the bird is meat. And broilers can be male or female. So a little bit more about considering if you want to have layers. So layers need very specific lighting to keep up with maximum egg production. So this would be about 16 hours per day. So that's definitely a little harder to achieve, especially in the winter time. And so a lot of people, especially up here in Northern New York, will use artificial lighting. And then also something to keep in mind, especially in the winter time, is that eggs can freeze in very frigid temperatures. So you want to make sure you're collecting eggs regularly. Also for layers, sometimes they're given calcium supplementation, such as in the form of oyster shells, and this helps to form eggs. And layers will need some sort of nesting box to lay their eggs. So a few more facts about broilers. They're very susceptible to heat stress, so that's something to keep in mind. in the summer and to find ways to mitigate that. And again, the timeline from birth to ideal slaughter is about 8 to 12 weeks. So a shorter time frame for keeping those birds. So next, to talk a little bit more about chicken breeds and considerations. So first we'll have a chart on layers and then broilers. So this first chart here across the top, we have our breeds. So of course, these are only some of the breeds. So we have Wyandotte, Plymouth Rock, Rhode Island Red, Sussex, Road Rock, Araucana, and our Leghorns. And so most of these breeds are heritage breeds, aside from the Road Rock, which is a hybrid. And actually all of the breeds on this chart here could be considered dual purpose. So that means that they have adequate egg production as well as their meat yield is all right. So this next layer here, or this next row, is considering the egg production of each of these breeds. And so all of these breeds are either average or above average, although we do have a few that have excellent production. So with Plymouth Rock, they're excellent egg producers. Our Sussex are also excellent egg producers. Road Rock are unbelievable, and the Leghorns are also excellent. So that's something to keep in mind when you're choosing what breeds you'd like to have. This next row here, weather tolerance. So again, something to consider if you live in a very hot climate or if you live in a very cold climate, is to consider how weather tolerant that breed is. Foraging capability. So this comes into play when you have your chickens just out roaming, so free range. And some chicken breeds are known to be better foragers than others. So for example, Sussex are excellent foragers, as well as our Araucana are also considered to be excellent foragers. Broodiness, so whether or not this is considering the time that hens would sit on the nest. So a few of the breeds on here are considered to be broody, so our Sussex and our Araucana. The maturity of the different breeds. So again, this is when they will start laying eggs initially. So some are earlier than others. So we have our Plymouth Rock that can reach maturity at about 18 to 20 weeks, or our Rhode Island Red at 19 weeks. And then some that don't reach maturity until a couple weeks later, such as our Araucana that's at 22 weeks. And then this last row here is egg color. So as you know, we can have different colored eggs. And so some of these breeds produce brown eggs, and the Araucana actually produces blue colored eggs. And then our Leghorns are the only breed on this chart that produce white eggs. So again, all things to consider when you're choosing what breeds you'd like to have in your flock. So next, just to compare a couple breeds of broilers. So at the top, we have our Cornish Cross, Freedom Rangers, and Australorps. So meat quantity, so as much meat as average carcasses will yield. So the Cornish Cross will yield the most out of these three, but then our Freedom Rangers and Australorps have a decent amount of meat quantity. Speed of growth, so when they reach that slaughter weight, the Cornish Cross is a little bit earlier than the other two, so at 6 to 8 weeks, while our Freedom Rangers and Australorps take a little bit longer. Temperament's also something to consider. So this might impact what type of housing you choose to have for your birds. So our Freedom Rangers and Australorps are more active than the Cornish Crosses. Eggs per year. So again, this is getting at that dual purpose again. So our Freedom Rangers can lay anywhere from 150 to 200 eggs per year on average. And our Australorps a little bit higher, 250 to 300. So also something to consider if you want to focus more on a dual purpose or choose a breed that's maybe more specific to egg laying or meat production. So broodiness, out of the three breeds here, Australorps are the only ones known to be broody. For foraging, Freedom Rangers and Australorps do forage Cornish Cross a little bit. And again, at that dual purpose, Australorps for sure, and Freedom Rangers maybe, Cornish Cross maybe not so much. Next, I just wanted to name a few breeds that tend to be pet breeds. So if any of you are interested in that. So our feather-footed Brahmas tend to be a pet chicken breed. The Silkies, so John actually has a few Silkies. Bantam, Black Copper Marin, Andalusian, such as the chicken in the picture here, as well as our Araucana, which that breed was also found on our layer slide, and those are one of the chicken breeds that lay blue eggs. So also some more considerations before buying. So again, what type of birds do you want? So that's something to consider with the breeds, but also the purpose. So do you want your birds to mainly be egg layers, or do you want to utilize them for meat? How many will you need to house? So are you interested in having many breeds or many chickens at one time? Do you want to focus on one breed, maybe only have 6 to 8 chickens? That's something to consider while you are trying to figure out your plan for having your flock. What will you do in the winter? So this may not be a concern if you are in a southern state. However, up here in New York, that's something we definitely need to consider. So that will again impact the type of housing you choose for your birds, and also, maybe whether or not you choose a more weather tolerant bird over a not so weather tolerant bird. How will you feed and water them? So there's different kinds of feed and water systems. Are you going to let your birds forage and be free range and kind of pick at insects and seeds? That's also something to consider. Where will you process or sell your birds? So this is more specific to people who are looking to raise birds for meat. But are you going to process them yourself? Are you going to take them somewhere? Who are you going to market your birds to? And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the presentation. And can you even have chickens where you are located? So this depends on your city, town, or village, as well as potentially your state. So here in New York, there are some towns or villages where you're not allowed to have certain livestock animals within the town limits. So that's certainly something you want to check before you go into buying chickens. And I saw a question pop up in the chat, and we will get to questions at the end of the presentation. Unless someone, if John wants to answer them as well.
Abby, I'm trying to answer questions as we go along.
Okay,
But if you guys
sounds
have any
good.
additional questions, I'll help out.
Okay, thanks, John.
No problem.
Okay, so some equipment needed to start. So this is kind of going from the chick stage. So of course you need a chicken coop or some sort of shelter. You need to look at feeders and waterers. So something I talked about on the previous slide, but also keep in mind different sizes for different ages. So if we look at this picture here, these feeders and waterers are smaller, designed for these smaller birds. But if you have more mature birds, you're likely going to need larger feeders and waterers that are a little bit more off the ground for those larger sized birds. So a brooder, so as in this picture here, this is an example of a brooder. So this is essentially heated housing for chicks, ducks, or poults, which are baby turkeys. So some easy examples you can use for this would be an old water trough, a kid's swimming pool, like in this picture, or simply a tote. And so the temperature you want to keep these at is about 80 to 92 degrees Fahrenheit is ideal. And then also, so of course, to help generate this heat, generally using a heat lamp, and a red bulb is preferred. And again, so you want to consider if you want pasture or a supplemental forage for your birds, or if you're going to keep them contained and feed them more concentrates. So a little bit more about housing and facilities. So like I mentioned, with feeders and waterers, you want to consider the height of those in relation to your birds and their age. So a mature chicken, such as the one in this picture here, is going to need a different size of feeders and waterers. as compared to the younger birds on the previous slide. Again, be prepared for your plans during frigid weather. So you want to make sure that your chickens have fresh, clean water at all times. So in the North Country, where we can get very cold temperatures and water can freeze easily, you want to make sure that you have a system to avoid that. So either checking that regularly to make sure the birds have access to water, or potentially looking at a heated water source. So for shelter, so a little bit more specific than just, some sort of enclosure or chicken coop. One main purpose of a shelter is to keep birds in and predators out. So this is especially important if you have certain predators, such as, foxes, anything lurking around your area. You want to make sure that they can't get to your birds easily. Shelter can also protect the birds from inclement weather, so rain, sleet, snow, anything like that. And you also want to consider an ideal layout. So keep in mind that if you have layers, you're going to be in and out collecting eggs. So you want something that you can easily either reach into or walk into, so that egg collecting is not harder than it needs to be. But also a shelter needs to be practical. So both price-wise, you don't want to be spending a ton of money, and also you just want it to be functional. So to do its purpose, keep the birds in, protect the birds, and keep predators out. So some examples of small scale types of shelters would include a hoop shelter, a pre-made chicken coop that you can purchase at a store like Tractor Supply or Rudd's, a chicken tractor, which I'll have a picture of that later on in the presentation, or other forms of mobile shelters. So to talk a little bit more about outdoor containment, so if you're going to have your birds outside, so one option would be electric net fencing. So this can easily be moved, so you can rotate the area your chickens are in, so they're not foraging in the same spot over a long period of time. You can also have hard fencing that's permanent. So if it's over a large area, you want to make sure your chickens have room to roam if they are going to be foraging, and also free range chickens. So it's a good idea to lock them inside at night if that's how one way you choose to house your chickens. But also, again, back to the rules based on different towns and villages. Some towns do require that you have your animals contained at all times. So again, that's something to look into before you decide exactly the housing mechanisms for your birds. So next, into purchasing chicks, so starting your own flock. First, of course, you want to figure out what breed or breeds you want based on your goals. So think back to those charts that we talked about at the beginning of the talk. If you want egg layers or broilers, if you want brown eggs or blue eggs. And something to keep in mind is that hatcheries require you buy a minimum of 6 to 25 chicks at a time. So 6 chicks is actually the New York State law. So you must purchase a minimum of that many chicks at one time. And one reason for this is warmth, so chicks can keep each other warm. So getting chicks, you can get them from some feed stores, stores such as Tractor Supply, or you can even order them through the mail, or even go see a neighbor that has chickens and they may have some eggs hatching and you can buy chicks from them as well. However, regardless of how you get your chicks, especially if they're coming through the mail, you want to make sure that you're looking at each chick for signs of illness, such as runny beaks, lethargy, etc. So you want to make sure that your chicks are healthy and doing well. And it's important to call the hatchery if any of the chicks die within 48 hours of you receiving them. And also, if you are going to get them through a hatchery or other business, you want to make sure you look into that business prior to buying, to kind of look at the reputation, maybe see what other people thought that bought chicks from there previously. So now to get into a bit of nutrition, and so I'm going to break this down between broilers and layers. So for broiler feed, you can start with a 20 to 23% protein chick starter feed from 0 to 4 weeks old. and then drop that down to a 19% protein grower and finisher feed from 4 weeks to that finishing age. And again, that finishing age will depend a little bit on the breed. So something to keep in mind with broiler nutrition is that they grow very quickly, so they need a diet that will support that. And then also something to consider with chicken nutrition is that grit is stored in the gizzard, and they use that to grind up the feed. So kind of instead of having teeth, the grit helps them grind up feed. So water is a very important part of any animal nutrition. So it's something to definitely consider and be mindful of. So for broilers, they need about 1 inch of water space per chick, and you want to increase that by 1/4 inch weekly as they grow. So up at 8 weeks, this should be about 3 to 4 inches of water space per bird. So again, that comes into play of the different sized waterers and feeders as birds grow older. And the ideal water temperature for these young birds is about 64 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So next, some nutrition aspects for layers. So for feed, 21% protein starter from 0 to 8 weeks old, and a 16% protein feed from 8 to 20 weeks. So about when they reach that egg, when they would start laying eggs at maturity. And then 16 to 17% protein feed for mature birds. So as you can see, a lower protein percentage than what our broilers would generally need. And that's partially due to the different purposes of these birds. And grit can also be fed to layers too. So again, that can help them grind up feed. So for water, of course, still important with our layers. So they need about 1 inch per bird up to 6 weeks old. So this would be about 100 birds per fount. And then 1 inch per bird for layers that are between 7 to 18 weeks old. So that would be about 50 birds per fount. And then a larger amount of water space, so 2 inches per bird when they reach that maturity. And this would equal about 30 mature birds per water fount. And so our layers have a 2-to-1 water to feed ratio at 70 degrees Fahrenheit. But as the temperature goes up, the ratio of water to feed also goes up. So think about when it gets really hot outside, you want to drink more water, as do your chickens. And so our layers generally can utilize 1 to 2 cups of water per bird per day. And so this is an example of a feeder. So this is an indoor coop. We have our mature birds, and as you can see, this feeder is definitely quite a bit bigger than that feeder that we saw in the brooder in the previous slides. So I did, again, want to stress the importance of water for nutrition. So chickens need fresh, clean water 24/7. So if your chickens become dehydrated, it can take them many days to recover. So not just 1 or 2 days, but it can take them a while to bounce back. So you want to make sure that you avoid that. When you're replacing the water, you want to make sure you actually replace it and not just refill it. So again, that fresh, clean water. Nipple waters can also work well, in addition to some of the examples that we've seen in the pictures. And one idea is to use ice cubes to keep water cool in the summer months to encourage the chickens to drink the water that they need. So to touch on more about the management of layers, so hens need about 3 to 4 square foot in the coop. So something to keep in mind when you're deciding what type of coop to buy and how many chickens you'd like to get. And you need about 3 inches of feed space per bird, so a little bit more than the water space. You need at least 9 inches of roosting space per bird, so where they can rest. And also if you have extra space, that can help you to avoid squabbles between hens. Also, something to keep in mind when you're looking at some sort of nest or nesting boxes, you need about 1 nest for every 4 hens in your coop. And some of your hens will find that they have a favorite nest. So you may find that they lay their eggs regularly in one specific nest. And you want to make sure you collect eggs regularly. So especially in our cold winter months to avoid them freezing. And like I mentioned, you need about 14 hours of light per day for proper laying schedules, but for max egg production, so the most that the chickens can do, you need that 16 hours of light per day that I mentioned earlier. So in the winter, when our days are shorter and we don't have as much light, and it may be cloudier some days than others, you can provide artificial light in the winter. So some people do that and find that their chickens maintain a more regular laying schedule through the winter. And also putting grit down on the floors can help the birds keep traction. So if it's slippery, such in the winter months, that can help them to keep their footing. So for broilers, again, you're raising until slaughter weight. So some broiler breeds reach maturity earlier than others. And they weigh about 6 to 10 pounds live. But again, consider that your yield is going to be about 67% or 2/3 of that. So males and females are usually mixed and kept together with broilers. And I did want to talk a little bit about larger scale broiler operations. So generally, these birds are kept in open floor barns. And you can also have broiler breeders. So these are the parent stock that are used to produce broilers. And then so utilizing a little bit of feed restriction, this allows them to maintain their reproductive capabilities. So after the broilers would lay fertilized eggs, they're collected, incubated, and then they hatch around 21 days, yielding broilers to grow. So again, we'll talk a little bit more about brooding. So this picture here is another example of a brooder. So you want to make sure that you're putting chicks in the brooder immediately when you get them home or in the mail. And it is a good idea. Some people dip their beaks in water. So this helps them know that water is there, helps them locate where that is in their new home. The ideal bedding material for a brooder is actually shavings or peat moss. So you do not want to use sawdust. So as you can see in this brooder here, they are using shavings. Make sure that 90-degree corners are rounded. So here, this can help avoid injury to the baby chicks in their new environment. So this water trough here is rounded, as was the kiddie pool in the example at the beginning of the presentation. And you can also cover this brooding place with a screen to help keep predators out that may be able to otherwise get in the coop. So it's a good idea and a different way to protect your chickens. So you want to make sure that your brooder is well ventilated, but also draft free. So you don't want your chicks getting too cold, but you want to make sure that they have enough fresh air so that there's not a buildup of ammonia and other unwanted things. And something to keep in mind, so again, a consideration before you decide or as you decide how many chicks and chickens that you would like for your flock, you want to provide about 6 to 7 square inches of space per chick in the brooder. So a little bit more about heat in the brooder. So they need a heating source, of course, to keep it at that temperature. So it's very important. The chicks need a temperature of around 90 degrees for the first 4 to 6 weeks of life. So a heating lamp, so this has an adjustable height, about 18 inches above the bedding is ideal. And you can utilize a 250 watt bulb, again, red preferred. So to check the temperature, there's a couple different ways to do this. Of course, you can lay a thermometer on the brooder to get the actual temperature, but there's also some visual cues you can look for to maybe determine before checking the actual temperature, seeing if it's near that ideal range. So if the chicks are huddling together, it's likely too cold. If the chicks are scampering around, that probably means that the temperature is comfortable. And if the chicks are scattering to the outside edges, it's likely too hot. So those 3 things can be an indicator of where your temperature lies and can help you decide if you need to move the heat lamp if it's too close, or maybe put it closer to the brooder. And also just a little tip, you can keep feeders away from the heat so that chicks have to run to get feed and then come back to the heat. So they're moving around a bit. So some health considerations. So we talked about nutrition management, and health is also very important for chickens. So there are certain vaccinations that chickens can have that can help prevent deadly diseases. So some hatcheries will actually vaccinate prior to shipping chicks out. And if you happen to show a chicken in the fair, some vaccination clinics do occur before the fair via 4-H programs. Some common diseases for chickens. So we have necrotic enteritis, which is the most common disease in broilers. Clostridium perfringens is a naturally occurring bacteria. However, if there's an overabundance of this bacteria, that can cause disease. Another common disease is known as water belly. Chickens can also experience respiratory issues. So we talked a little bit about runny beak, things like that. Coccidiosis, and especially for broilers, excessive heat can cause heat stress. So that's also a common health consideration and concern with our birds. So if you have health issues early on when you have chicks, it's likely that they will as they get older. So something to keep in mind. You want to start with healthy chicks so they can have their best chance to stay healthy as an adult bird. And it's a good idea to monitor or observe your chicks and chickens daily, just so you can be mindful of some of the symptoms and look for anything abnormal. So if you're monitoring behavior regularly, it'll be easy to tell when a chick or chicken is off. And I did want to touch on a hot topic health concern as of right now. So the highly pathogenic avian influenza. So there was an outbreak of avian influenza around 2014 to 2015. And this has started spreading in the United States again. So it wasn't in New York State until last weekend, but there was the first case of this outbreak in Suffolk County just last weekend. So it is in the state. So avian influenza spreads through contact with feces or contaminated surfaces, or potentially through the air. So for example, it can come onto your farm or in your backyard via someone's shoes, clothing, or even a feed truck that's traveling from farm to farm. So some symptoms of highly pathogenic avian influenza include sudden death, if your chickens suddenly have a lack of energy, if they are decreasing in egg production, certain respiratory symptoms like coughing, diarrhea, and more. So just some little tips. So how do you keep your chickens safe? So you want to watch for wild birds. So these wild birds can spread avian influenza to backyard flocks. So you want to make sure and ensure that, try to minimize contact between your birds and wild birds. Make sure, again, you're monitoring and looking at your birds for symptoms. If you think that you have it, make sure that you contact your vet and report it. So it is a reportable disease. And also keep strict biosecurity practices for your flock. And this goes for if you have a few chickens in your backyard to you have a larger operation for egg layers. So you want to make sure that you know who's coming in and out, make sure people are clean. So this could be making sure that you are sanitizing and just even maybe close your flock to others. So make sure you're doing all that you can to keep this disease out. So I did want to touch on a few other poultry species. So for ducks, so we're not just going to talk all about chickens for tonight. So there's many different breeds of ducks, and some are made for meat and some are for eggs. So just like chickens, various purposes depending on the breed of duck. So for duck feed, you need a mash at 22 to 24% protein for the first 1 to 4 weeks of life, and then a 20% protein feed after 4 weeks until they reach their slaughter weight. And so interestingly, ducks will actually eat 3 pounds of feed for each pound of weight they gain. And meat ducks reach slaughter weight at about 8 weeks old, so similar to our chickens. So a little bit about turkeys. So generally when we're talking about turkeys for meat, we're looking at large white turkeys. So these take a little bit longer to reach finishing slaughter weight than chickens and ducks. So it takes them until about they are 16 to 20 weeks old. And they actually dress in at 15 to 20 pounds. So again, bigger than our chickens and ducks. So for raising turkey poults or baby turkeys, you need a 26% starter game bird feed, and you can even make your own. So you can utilize a 26% protein mix for turkey and wild game, add 4 pounds of fish meal, as well as 20 pounds of 19% broiler grower feed to make your own. And for a 21% turkey feed, so as those poults get a little bit older, you can mix 2 pounds of fish meal and 20 pounds of 19% broiler grower feed. And you'll feed that up to 8 weeks of age. So before we move into more marketing steps, so selling meat and eggs, I did want to talk a little bit more about poultry on pasture. So if you're interested in having your chickens kind of be free range, mainly forage, you want to consider moving their pen once daily if they are contained, and then more often as they grow. So you want to make sure they have enough space to forage around. So some free range options, you can provide a semi-permanent shelter with electric netting. So again, somewhere the birds can get out of the wind or rain, but also be free to move around. But you still want to make sure that you're rotating the pastures or the areas that they're allowed to forage on. Turkeys can actually be pastured too, but something to keep in mind is that they can fly and they like to roost. So your enclosure may look slightly different if it's for turkeys versus if it's for chickens. And also, of course, you want to make sure you're keeping a supply of fresh, clean water available, even if your birds are out on pasture. And you can also provide concentrates to supplement their nutrition, so from the things that they're foraging from the ground. And for about how many birds you can have on a certain amount of land, you can have about 500 birds on 1 acre of pasture. So I wanted to show a couple examples of housing or outside enclosures. So we have this here. We have some electric netting, so this can be movable. You see we have some structures that the birds can get into if they'd like to get out of the weather, if they're going to lay their eggs. But we also see this water out here. So you can see that they're still providing water, even though their birds are essentially out in a field in a pasture. And so this example here, so this is what we would consider to be a chicken tractor. So as you can see, this structure has some wheels on the back, so it's movable. And we have our farmer here tending to these chickens. And as you can see by these little blocks that are brown around the green grass, this chicken tractor is slowly moving. So he's making sure he moves his chickens to new areas so they're not always foraging on the exact same spot. So I wanted to cover some classifications of poultry operations. So of course we have our backyard flocks. So this could be if you're just raising chickens to have egg and meat products just for you, maybe to sell to some neighbors. A small scale, so this would be up to 1,000 birds. And so if we're looking at broilers, this would mean up to 1,000 birds can be slaughtered and processed on farm. So if you're looking at this, some possible processing locations on site could be outside, in your garage, in an open-sided shed, an old milk house, trailer, etc. And so some processing equipment needed if you're doing it this way. You need kill cones, a barrel plucker, evisceration supplies, a chill tank, a cooler, a propane scalder, a propane burner, tables, packaging supplies, as well as a fridge and freezer to store the products after the birds are slaughtered. And then also we have 5A for operations under 20,000 birds. And we'll talk a little bit more about 5A processing in a few slides. And then of course we have our large scale or commercial operations. So these could be housing breeders, broilers, or egg layers. So housed at a large scale facility. These birds can often be housed in open floor barns, and biosecurity is very important. So we talked about some ways to mitigate the spread of avian influenza. Generally on these large scale commercial operations, you have to shower in and shower out and change your clothes and wear specific clothes that are kept at that facility. So making sure that essentially nothing comes in and nothing comes out. So some poultry processing considerations. So how will you do it? We talked a little bit about this at the beginning. Will you do it yourself? Will you hire someone to do it? Will you sell the birds live? And again, keep in mind what your goals are. So you need to have them processed at specific facilities if you intend to sell to restaurants, etc. So keep that in mind. If you're having someone process your birds for you, make sure you schedule in advance. So up here in northern region of New York State, we generally find that our livestock producers, so whether they have beef, cattle, swine, are waiting a little bit to get their animals processed. So make sure that you schedule way in advance so that you make sure that you have a spot for when you would like your animals slaughtered and you don't have to wait longer than you'd like. So for the poultry processing, before processing, you want to stop feeding your birds about 12 hours before this. And the steps for processing, so first you kill the bird in a kill cone and let the blood drain. Then you scald the bird at 145 degrees for 45 seconds, but you do want to make sure you don't have this any hotter than 145 or the skin may tear. After scalding, you pluck the feathers. So this can be done manually or there are machines that do this for you. And then you would eviscerate, which means you remove all of the insides, the tail, and the trachea. You then put the carcass into an ice bath to chill. You bag and label it and then store it properly. So a little bit more about 5A processing facilities. So these are specifically for non-amenable species and poultry. So 5A facilities do not require federal inspection. They are inspected by state officials and they are held to different standards than a custom exempt operation. So if meat is processed at a 5A processing facility, it can be sold by the farmer or the slaughterhouse itself. And 5A processed meat can be sold in state or across state lines, although some states have restrictions on this, so keep that in mind. However, animals processed must have certification of good health by their veterinarian, so we don't want sick animals going through. And you likely need a HACCP and an SOP, so standard operating procedures if you have a 5A processing facility. So more for poultry specific 5A, and again, these 5A regulations are more specific to New York State. So if you're in a different state, they may vary. So for a 5A facility, you must have separate killing and evisceration rooms and a separate processing and packaging room. So these need to be separated by some sort of structure. We'll look at some examples of a 5A facility in a minute. So you must have sinks for hand washing in both the kill and evisceration rooms and the processing room. So if you have crates that can hold live poultry on site, they must have a separate area of cleaning and storing. And there is a specific grading system for poultry. So similar to some other meats that are graded. So this would be A, B, and C. So this is an example of a 5A facility. So again, you see we have our waiting area or live bird area. There is an office in this plan. So first we have the kill room. So our kill cones, scalder, and picker that we talked about. And this is separate from our evisceration room and into here. And then there's also a walk-in cooler as well as a storage area. So again, For poultry specifically, the kill room and the evisceration room must be separated. So getting started with 5A processing, and again, this is specific to New York State. So first you must apply for licensing. So you would go through the checklist that the New York State Department of Ag and Markets has for 5A processing. You would obtain pre-approval from local zoning officials, provide evidence of qualification of the facility and the animal products. So essentially proving that you have a good facility, that your animal products are wholesome and of good quality. And then you'd submit your licensing application. And then as far as regulations, so you must operate in a clean and sanitary manner. You may not expose product to insects or other contaminants. You may not slaughter, possess, or sell unwholesome meat out of that facility. You may not feed slaughter leftovers to hogs, and you may not butcher domesticated dogs and cats. So we talked about the 1,000 bird limits. So a little bit more on that. So we have our 1,000 bird exemption. So this would apply to chickens, turkeys, ducks, geese, guinea hens, etc. So this 1,000 bird exemption means that individual poultry farms can process up to 1,000 birds from their own flock without a 5A license or USDA inspection oversight. There are stipulations for sale of the product. They may only sell products processed in this way right from the farm or at New York State farmers markets. The meat must be sold frozen or refrigerated at 41 degrees or less, but you cannot process birds at a farmer's market in New York State. And then also with this 1,000 bird limit, 1 turkey equals 4 chickens. So that number for turkeys is actually less than 1,000. And so slaughtering birds falling under any other exemption must be slaughtered in a 5A facility. So I did want to show some different examples of some different slaughtering units. So this is a mobile unit that is actually was in Massachusetts. So as you can see, all the equipment needed is right on this trailer here. So this can essentially travel around to different farms. And so you have your kill cones, other equipment, but essentially all contained in one mobile unit. This is another example here. So this is could be in, a reefer trailer. But so you have your kill racks and cones here up at the front, the scalder and the plucker. And then this is separated. So the kill and the clean side barrier wall. So again, kill is separated from the evisceration room. You have your evisceration table, and then chill tubs, which are movable for after the bird is processed. So again, just an example of a small scale slaughtering facility. I did want to point out some local poultry processors. So in Adams, there's Ebersol's Custom Cutting, which they do chickens, turkey, ducks, and geese. So again, this is a custom operation. Garish Riverbend Farm in Potsdam, they do chickens, turkey, game birds, and pheasants, and they are 5A. The Halal Regional Fresh Poultry Market in Syracuse does chickens, turkey, duck, geese, and rabbits, is also 5A. And then Ridgecrest Turkey Farms in Brockport, they do chickens and turkey, and they are also 5A. So another thing to keep in mind, especially since we've just been talking about processing for meat birds, is selling a poultry byproduct, so eggs. So again, our mature hens, of course, breed dependent, can produce about 1 egg per day at peak production. So again, that maximum light, so about 16 hours a day. So if you have 20 hens, this can equal to about 140 eggs per week, which is roughly around 12 dozen eggs per week just from 20 hens. So selling eggs from your home or a farm stand. So these eggs must be washed and refrigerated. The cartons have to be labeled and dated. So with the count of the eggs, the source, so if it's chicken, duck, farm name and address, refrigeration, as well as a health statement. However, you must also include the grade and the size if you're selling to a local store or at a farmer's market in New York State. So some different marketing options. So regardless of if you have eggs or meat, so you can sell to restaurants, retail stores, distributors, hotels, or other similar establishments. So again, for our meat birds, so direct marketing of live animals. So you can sell the animal to a consumer for them to butcher elsewhere. So with custom butchering facilities, you can also sell them at live animal markets or auctions. If you're looking to do retail sales, you can sell at a farm stand or store. You can even sell from your porch or a small roadside stand. So there's many different ways to market your products. However, you want to make sure that you're charging enough to cover your production costs, your time, and your efforts. So don't sell yourself short by any means. So some essential marketing steps, again, regardless of if you're interested in eggs or meat. So identify the markets, establish repertoire. So you want to make sure you have a good reputation with your customers. Advertise, advertise, advertise. So whether that means putting an ad somewhere in a newspaper, posting somewhere in a Facebook group. And also it's a good idea to establish a web page or a social media site to connect consumers to your business operations. So a lot of things have moved digital. And so a lot of people turn to social media for information. So that's a good idea to get the word out about your eggs or poultry if you're interested and on social media. There's also different resources that can help consumers find you. So one example is Meat Suite. So this this website is only available in New York and North Carolina. But essentially, a consumer can type in, so say they wanted to find a farm within 25 miles of their zip code and say they wanted duck. So they could search that. And so again, there are poultry products on this website, but this helps consumers find locally produced high quality meats in bulk near them. So it's a handy free resource. And if you're interested in having your farm listed on Meat Suite, again, it's free. So just go to the website and we can also help you with that if you contact Cooperative Extension. We also have some local advertisement opportunities just right here in Jefferson County, New York. So we have our local food guide that's published every year. So you can choose to have your farm or your business listed in our local food guide. So you can list what products you sell. So whether that be eggs, chicken, anything like that, turkey. So if you'd like to be listed in our local food guide, you can go ahead and contact Erin and we will make sure we get you included. And before we turn to any questions that aren't answered in the chat, I do want to invite John to give an overview of our Farm Ops program.
All right, so just real quick, guys. So what our Farm Ops program does is we offer through CCE Jefferson County free education and hands-on training for active duty military and veterans that are interested in agriculture. Some of the things that we offer is we try to do a lot of individualized programming that fit your interests, such things as like online courses, mentorships with local farmers, in-person workshops and webinars, as well as one-on-one counseling. And if any of you guys are veterans or active duty, feel free to reach out to me. There's my contact information on the screen there, or you can always contact the CC office and just ask for me. And if you guys just have any additional questions or anything, feel free to contact me at any time.
Thanks, John. So here are the resources for this presentation. And again, our contact, so my email's here as well as John's. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at any time.
So guys, while answering some of the questions I was going through here, I just want to make sure that I got answered it in the best way possible. Gabrielle, you had a question about sand in brooders, and I just wanted to see if you had any additional questions on that, if my comment kind of helped you out on that, or if you had anything else to add.
Yes, it was you definitely clarified the moisture part. Do you think that it would retain like a whole lot of moisture that would be harmful to like a brooder situation?
So I've never used sand, and if it's a resource that you have and you can use freely, you might be able to use it. My only concern would be that you're going to find that raising chicks is they're going to get right up into your water. They're going to spill water everywhere, and the older they get, they're going to leave quite a mess, and you're going to be cleaning that your brooder, if not every day, at least every other day, the older that they get. And it just might be harder for you in the long run. A lot of times with the shavings, what I've found is, I can skim off the top layer and, just add a little bit on top. One bale of the shavings the bedding shavings that you can get at Tractor Supply from somewhere between, it's under $10. I want to say $6 or $7, can last one brooder, which is about the size. I use stock tanks, so one stock tank will get a one set of chicks through to maturity, and I'll have plenty left for the next one.
Okay.
So it probably could be done, but I have a feeling that the sand's going to retain a lot of moisture, and especially when you have all that heat from your heat lamps and with the birds dropping all that additional moisture, you might be susceptible to mold and other health issues.
Okay. I decided that I was gonna go like maybe start researching the sand aspect only because I thought it might like retain heat better in the brooder.
And that might be my main concern would just be cleaning.
Okay.
And ease of cleaning. Usually if you just get a run-of-the-mill heat lamp, a lot of times when we've gotten our chicks, depending on what type of breed we've had, we raise waterfowl, chickens, we've raised pheasants before. We try to do turkeys, but a lot of times when we have our summer or our spring rotation come through, it's still dropping well below freezing at night, but we keep them on an enclosed porch, which is also in the 30s, but just a heat lamp is sufficient. But if it works out, let me know.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for answering my question.
Not a problem. And then the other question, I just want to make sure, we had talked a long time about, but Kyle, you had some questions about pheasants. Oh. All right. Hey. That's all right. Do you guys have any other questions, or Abby, you got anything else?
I don't have anything else. I do have, Maddie mentioned that sand does retain heat, but sometimes the chicks can get too hot. So just one more comment on the sand aspect. Gabby's question.
Okay.
Oh, Kyle, did you have another question for John about pheasants?
You hear me?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not real tech savvy. I couldn't get it unmuted.
That's okay.
Yeah, we're just considering raising some pheasants. We have labs that we hunt with, and we were considering raising some pheasant chicks. Just wondered about any particular specifics that we should be aware of to pheasants versus some of the other poultry that you went over.
So pheasants are a different breed in and of themselves. They're very intelligent, they're very aggressive, and they're very sensitive. When you just in general, when you're starting them out, you wouldn't be surprised at a high mortality rate when they're younger. They're very susceptible to changes in temperature and things like that. So you want to make sure that you keep that constant when they're young. As they get older, they're can become cannibalistic. So at about 6 weeks of age, in my experience, you're going to want to put on what's called blinders. They're like a plastic thing that you put on their beak, and you'll put a piece of plastic through their nasal cavity, and that just keeps them from pecking on each other, because they will definitely eat each other. They're also very intelligent, and they, in my experience, they've been known to dig under enclosures. If they see once they're able to fly, if they're able to see one little hole in your enclosure, they'll fly right through it. So I would definitely recommend that you start off small. If you have particulars, I mean, I could really talk for hours about raising pheasants, because they're that tricky, but what makes them a fine game bird. We can definitely help you out with that.
Okay, thank you. Would you be able to put your contact information up again before you finish, please?
Absolutely. Abby, you want to throw that up there?
Both of you.
Or just my email, and then I can get with you, and I can give you a call sometime tomorrow, and we can talk a little bit more. Abby, you're mute.
There we go. Okay, John, are you JJB399? Is that your email?
Yep.
Okay.
Here, I can actually put it in the chat.
Okay, I got it.
Oh, there you go.
And so we also got a question from TQ about a copy of tonight's slides. So we will be sending out the recording for this presentation. So it'll be converted to a YouTube link essentially, but hopefully tomorrow, if not tomorrow, early next week, we'll get that to all of you.
Abby, I'm seeing one more question from TQ, saying that she has goats and wonder if goats and chickens can share the same fenced enclosure. And I can speak real quick on that, as I pasture my poultry with my sheep, which are pretty much the same as goats, and they cohabitate well. They might have little spats here and there, but I've never had any mortality from that, or any stress of any kind. And I will tell you, even if they have their separate sheds, that the goats are going to go into the chicken shed, and the chickens are going to go into the goat shed. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. I would say you should be fine.
John, we actually got one more question. And so I don't have experience with this. So maybe John or Maddie, is there any advantage to having heat panels over lamps in a brooder?
What do you mean by heat panels, Gabrielle?
So they
I'm not
started
sure.
selling like heat panels that let off like the same amount of heat as like a actual heat lamp, but it's just like not this, it's not like a light source. It's just kind of like, I don't know how to explain it. It's like it's just like a panel that gives off
Oh,
the amount of heat.
that you put under the bedding or put into the brooder.
Yeah.
I have heard of those and I've seen those. I don't have any experience with them, so I can't really speak to them.
Okay.
Some of the ones I've seen offered online, they look like a decent product. But like I said, I don't have any experience with it. I would imagine it would be safer because one thing you really need to be careful with your heat panels is, or with your heat lamps, is they do put off quite a bit of heat and it could be a fire hazard. Depending on where you put it, so you need to keep an eye on them. But yeah, unfortunately, I don't have any experience with the heat panels.
Okay, thank you.
Gabby, that's
problem.
something we can look into and see if there's any research or any resources from Cornell or some other universities that compare the two and get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Does anyone have any last questions? If not, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate you spending your evening with us, and we'll be sure to send out the recording as well as hopefully a follow-up to Gabrielle's question on the heat panels as well. So thank you again and have a great night.